Hello everyone and welcome back. In this video we're going to add associations between our users and our comics, or our items in your case, since you're probably not doing comic books. What we're going to do is we are going to make it so that whenever we create a comic, it is automatically assigned to a user. As part of that, we're also going to prevent users from creating comics unless they are authenticated. So step one is to update our comic model, because right now we have all this information about the comic, but nothing in here about who the owner is. So let's go ahead and add that field, owner, O-W-N-E-R. That's going to be an object. And inside of there, we're going to have two properties. We're going to have an ID, and we're going to have a username. Now the username is just going to be a string, but the ID is going to be another object. And we're going to have two pieces of information on this object. We're going to have the type, and we're going to have the ref. And if you remember, this is the same type of thing that we used for associating our comments with our comics. So the type is going to be mongoose.schema.types to ypes.object_id, and the capitalization matters. The reference is going to be user. That's saying it's going to reference the user collection. So that's all we have to do with our comic model. Next, we're going to disable most of our seeding, and then actually we're going to end up disabling all of it, our database seeding. So we have our seed.js, and what this is doing is this is creating new comics. The problem is that these comics are being created without users. So there's no user information on these comics. So we don't want that anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the things that delete the comics and the comments, and then comment out the part that's creating new ones. So I'm going to save this, and then I'm actually going to do node app.js because I only want to run this one time. So it's running, deleted all the comics, deleted all the comments. Let's refresh, go back to comics, and we can see there's nothing there, which is exactly what we want. Now I'm going to shut the server down, and I'm going to go into app.js and comment out the part where we are seeding. So we don't want that anymore. And now when we run nodaemon, that seed is not being called, so we just have our comics there. The next step is going to be to update our routes, our comic routes, wherever those are, routes, comics, and specifically our create route to add the user on there. So real quick, let's just go ahead and console.log request.user, and remember this whole user thing is being passed to all of our routes. So let's save and log in. Come on. There we go. Test, log in. And that redirects us to comics. So let's look here. We have on our user object, we have an ID, a username, and an email. Now when we set up our comic model, we are adding the owner's ID and the owner's username. The reason, by the way, that we're adding both the ID and the username is so that we have to make fewer calls to the database. You could, theoretically, just add the ID and not need the username, and then whenever you needed to find out who the owner was, you could just query on that ID. But the problem is, we're going to be doing that a lot. Every time we go to a comic, we're going to look up who the owner is, and we need to know the owner's name. So it's a lot more efficient to go ahead and just store that username right here so that we're only getting the comic from the database, and we don't have to actually query the database for the user as well. So that's why we're adding the username there, even though the ID here is the part that establishes the relationship. So on the create route, we have to add an additional item. So after the image link, let's add the owner. And remember, the owner is an object that has two things on it, the ID and the username. The ID is request.user._ID, because remember we want it to be right there. And the username is request.user.username. Because remember, again, that's right there. Reading this information from the request.user. So let's go ahead and save that. So let's go ahead and test it out. Let's add a comic, and then just add the information. Watchman, description here, Alan Moore, DC, pick a date, Watchmen, issue number 1, It is a superhero. It is in color. And let's get a link to go back into seeds and just get the image link. Submit. It's not working. Let's see what's it trying to do. Unhandled promise rejection. Can't read property ID of undefined. That's because I'm not logged in. So let's log in first. Test, test. And now let's add a comic. Add more. PC. Watchman, issue number 1. It is superhero, color, and then paste in our image link, submit, see if it works. There we go. Works like a charm. But now we also, we're not logging it, let's pull up Atlas. But now not only do we have that same information, we now have the owner object with the object ID and the username. So we can, if we want to, update this to add like added by or something like that with that username. The last thing I want to do in this video is to prevent the problem we ran into where we tried to create a comic but we weren't logged in. So we're going to stop users who are not authenticated from creating a comic. And this is a very simple solution because we've already implemented it somewhere else inside of our main.js. All we're going to do is we're going to copy this isLoggedIn middleware and paste it over into comics. And yes, I know this is not dry. We're going to fix that part later. Function is logged in, and then up here in the post we're going to call that first, is logged in. Honestly, we can go ahead and add that to the other routes because we want the create, we want the new, because there's no reason somebody should be able to access the new form if they're not signed in. Then that's fine, that's fine. Edit we want, because nobody should be able to edit anything unless they're signed in. Update is the same thing. Delete is the same thing as well. So now we've got that added. By the way, anytime your server restarts, it'll log you out. So go back to comics, and let's try and edit this. Nope, it's going to redirect us to login. Let's try to delete this. Nope, going to redirect us back to login. Let's try to add a comic. Nope, got to log in first. Now if we do test, test, and we can add a comic, not a problem. We can go into here and edit this, not a problem. We can delete it even. There we go, it's gone. In this video, we did a few different things. First, we updated our comic model to add the reference to the owner using the ID, and also added the username as a string just to make our database queries more efficient. Then inside of our comics route, we did the create route, wherever it is, create route. We updated that to add that information on, referencing request.user to find that information. And that request.user object is passed to us automatically by Passport and Express Session. We also disabled the seed the database function because we need our comics to have users attached to them and have valid users attached to them. And then we went into app.js and actually disabled the whole thing entirely. Finally, we added some middleware to our comics.js file, just the isLoggedIn that we got from our main route earlier, the account page, and then just called it as middleware on the routes that we wanted it to apply to. So things that we wanted people to authenticate before they're able to do. I don't care if somebody looks at one of the comics, whether they're authenticated or not, but I don't want them to be able to edit it unless they're authenticated, so on and so forth. As always, if you have questions, let me know. I'll be happy to help. Thanks.